For Perfect Pebbles tells the story of a little girl thrust into the horror of World War II when her family was sent to a concentration camp. Marion Blumenthal Lazan's memoir portrays the resilience of the human spirit and proves that it is possible to endure far more than we think we're capable of. Marion's revenge lies in her having lived her life filled with peace, happiness, and a great love. She is passionate in telling her story of hardship and the valuable lessons she learned to people of all ages, and does so magnificently in For Perfect Pebbles. Her mission is to ensure that future generations are able to live in peace and believes that all it takes is understanding, respect, and faith. What an incredible honour to chat with you, Marion. Thank you so very much for generously sharing your wisdom with me. Marion, thank you again so much. I'm so grateful to you, and I feel very humbled. And I'm astonished that at your age you have so much passion and so much energy, and you have such a strong message. And I loved your book, The For Perfect Pebbles. But could you tell me where that passion comes from? What drives you to share your story? Why is it so important to you?
It is of utmost importance to do this now while there is still time. As you know, obviously, this is the very last generation that will hear these stories firsthand and have their questions answered. So stories of the Holocaust or stories of that time period must be shared now. And the questions of the young people must be answered. And there's much to be learned. The lessons learned pertain to today's world situation and definitely to our own individual lives. Simply to be kind and good and respectful towards one another. That is the basis for peace. No doubt. No doubt.
It's very simple, isn't it?
Very simple and yet so difficult to achieve, to be kind and good towards one another. And there is really so very little that we can do against the negativity in our world, but how we treat, behave, and reach out towards one another, that is entirely up to us. And then when I speak to the students, to the young adults, I also tell them to be very, very careful before they follow anyone's lead. And it's easy for them to do, but they have to search their hearts and their minds as to what the consequences might be. It is not cool to follow just anyone's lead without first checking to see what the consequences are. Very, very important. And these are just some of the messages that I share with the students. And we must not generalize and judge an entire group by the actions of some within that group. That's another message, another lesson learned. And I mentioned the righteous Gentiles, these are non-Jewish people who did their utmost to save Jewish families. They would hide them in the attics, they would hide them in the basements, farmers would hide them out in the barns, they were hidden in convents. And when these good people were caught doing what they felt was the right thing to do, they also were deported to concentration camps and in many cases lost their lives. So that's what brings me to the message that we must never generalize and judge. An entire group. It's very easy for us to do, and it should not be. We have to.
Yes. Marion, your beautiful book is aimed, well, not mainly at children, but you have children in your thoughts too when you were writing it, I imagine. And it's just such a beautiful, short, simple story, or the way you've written it is simple, and very easily understood. And at the beginning of it, you speak a little bit about the history of the Nazi Party and how Hitler came to rise to such power. And I think that's really important to know through your messaging about not following the leader, to such an extent that, they glorify him. So could you just tell me a little bit about, just briefly, the history of the Nazi Party for those who don't really know?
Well, the Nazi Party, it's just a group of German who were under the influence of the guy with the mustache. You'll never hear me mention his name, okay? And the reason they became so powerful is partially because Germany lost the First World War. And when a country loses a war, they become destitute. In addition to that, Germany had to pay restitution to the countries that they fought and lost to. So money was very scarce. The population became very unhappy. And then the guy with the mustache came along and he said, I will improve our way of life. All we need to do is get rid of the Jewish people, who were a fraction of a percent of the German population. And perhaps, I don't know, perhaps there was some envy because we were so few, the Jewish people were so few. But you need to know, Kelly, throughout the centuries, material things were taken away from our people. Throughout the centuries, Fiddler on the Roof, yes? That play?
Yes.
Well, throughout the centuries, material things were taken from our people for whatever reason. And all that was left is knowledge, books, reading, education. They couldn't take away what's between the ears. And people are able to do well in their sciences because of their knowledge, to do well in music, to do well in medicine, and in perhaps in monetary areas as well, banking. So envy set in. There became Jews, some Jews, not all, of course, but some Jews became successful. And then envy set in. And when the guys with the mustache said, well, let's get rid of the Jews, they were pounded upon. And that was sort of one of the reasons, I would imagine. Yes. Envy. And sad. There's so much to that we can all contribute to society, all of us in our own separate ways. But when you have such opposition, then it becomes, and there were so few of the Jewish people there's nothing that they could do and to fight against it. And we had the Holocaust, and too many of the population, the German population, followed the leaders' demands. And we had the concentration camps, and the story that went on beyond that. That's just 6 million of our people were murdered during the Holocaust. 6 million, and that is totally 1/3 of the entire pre-World War II population. So, and among them were 1.5 million children. 1.5 million children. What is the population of Australia, let's say?
Australia. Oh, goodness. I think that we are up to, I should have checked, Marion. I think we're up to about 28 million.
28 million? So
yes.
A little bit more than 1/3 of your population gone.
Yes.
Can you imagine? So you have to take into perspective, yes. But anyway, so that's partially it. I'm not an economist, I'm not a historian, so I don't go into that as much as you might like me to.
No, I just wanted a brief insight into the history of how Hitler became so powerful, and you do that so beautifully in the book as well. So Marion, you was as a child, like, you knew no other way, but I know that your mum told you stories of what it was like before, of what life was like in Germany before. But for you, do you remember the first day that you arrived in Bergen-Belsen, which was the camp that you were sent to?
I remember it vividly. It was a bitterly dark, rainy, cold night when we arrived in Bergen-Belsen. And we were pulled and dragged out of the cattle cars, and we were greeted by the German guards who were shouting at us and threatening us with their weapons and with the most vicious attack dogs by their sides. I, at that time, was a very frightened 9-year-old. And Kelly, to this day, I still have a certain sense of fear whenever I see a German Shepherd. Bergen-Belsen was divided in various areas. It was sectioned off and surrounded by electrified barbed wire. Guards were always in strategically placed high guard towers. And in the evenings, as soon as it would turn dark, the bright searchlights from above would constantly sweep the campgrounds. 600 of us, 600 of our people were crammed into each of the crude, wooden, heatless barracks, meant for 100 when originally built. There were triple-decker bunk beds, and it took 2 people who shared each one of those bunks, and German winters were bitter cold and very long. We were given only one thin blanket per bunk and a straw-filled mattress. And this bunk was our only living quarters, and that for 2 people. I was very lucky that I was able to share a bunk with my mother and that my brother was able to share a bunk with our father. But can you imagine 2 adults, 2 strangers, sharing a bunk under such horrendous conditions? A bunk that was no larger than the small cot bed that some of us are all familiar with. And I remember the first time seeing a wagon filled with what I thought was firewood for the one small oven that we had in our barrack. That oven, of course, was never used. I soon realized that what was in the wagon were dead, naked bodies thrown one on top of the other. Toilets and so-called washing facilities were at a great distance. In the most primitive outhouses, toilets were long wooden benches with holes cut into them, one next to the other. There was no privacy. There was no toilet paper. There was no soap, and hardly ever any water with which to wash. And in the almost year and a half that we were in Bergen-Belsen, never once were we able to brush our teeth. There were no trees, no flowers, nor did we ever see a blade of grass. And whenever it rained, we had to slosh through the mud, adding even more misery to our already dismal existence. Every morning, every single morning, without fail, we were ordered to line up on a huge field. It was called an Appellplatz, 5 in a row as we were counted. We would have to stand there until each and every one of us was accounted for, often from early morning till late at night, without food, without water, no matter what the weather, without protective clothing. Frostbite was common. We would treat our affected toes and fingers with the warmth of our own urine. Our diet consisted of a slice of bread and some hot watery soup with grizzly meats and turnips and potato peels, and the bread was later cut back and given to us just once a week, and only if our so-called quarters were neat and in order. Our birthday present to one another was that little piece of bread that we had saved up from the previous week. The Nazis did their utmost to break us physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Unfortunately, they did succeed with many of our people. It was not uncommon for people who were no longer responsible for their actions to attempt escape. And the failure of their attempts to escape were obvious when we saw their dead bodies hanging electrocuted against the barbed wire. Malnutrition, dysentery, and the loss of the will to go on is what destroyed body and mind. Death was an everyday occurrence, and the dark, crowded quarters often caused us to trip and fall over the dead. Bodies could not be taken away fast enough. We as children saw things that no one, no matter what the age, should ever have to see. And when we were standing on this appel where we stand with, as they were, you have a puppy dog, right? And
that is my son's puppy. I had to lock her out.
Kelly, in the midst of all this horror, it puts a smile on our faces, right?
I know, Marion. I know. Oh, gosh.
Anyway, it was unimaginable. There are no words, no pictures, or you might have seen movies, perhaps through 2 documentaries pertaining to the Holocaust, but there is no way that this can be described truly in words or pictures. Our bodies and clothes were infested with lice. We learned that there was a distinct difference between head lice and clothes lice. Squashing them between my thumbnails became my primary pastime. Much of my time, now I'm going to tell you where the title of my memoir, where it comes from. My memoir, 4 Perfect Pebbles, where's that book? Here it is. 4 Perfect Pebbles. I don't know if you can see that. Yes.
Yes.
The title is based on one of the many games that I used to play, imaginary games. I decided that if I were to find 4 pebbles of about the same size and shape, that would mean that the 4 members of my family would all survive. My mother, my father, my brother, and I. It was a torturous, painful, very difficult game to play. What if I couldn't find the 3rd or 4th pebble? Might that mean that 1 or 2 of my family members would not survive? Nevertheless, this game gave me something to hold on to, some distant hope. After a number of months on our meager diets, our stomach shrunk, and teenagers and men suffered most from malnutrition, and they were the first to die. Those who lasted the longest were the women, and mothers in particular. It was their strong will to keep their children alive that kept them going. And my mother was one of those remarkable ladies. There is no doubt in my mind that it was my mother's inner strength and fortitude that finally saw us through. No doubt. And this was my mother, age of 104. My mother passed away 6 weeks short of 105. And this was a lady who at the age of 37 was left a widow, deathly sick after liberation, and with 2 sick children. My father died 6 weeks after liberation. There she was left without a home, no money, and no country, not knowing what would be next. So certainly we are from Germany initially, and there was no way that we were going to stay in Germany, no way. So eventually we emigrated to Holland. We were there for 3 years where we sort of recuperated, and then came to the United States in 1948. Mm-hmm. And
there were a couple of things I particularly wanted to ask you about your mum. As a mother, and, you know, I'm a mother and you're a mother, and now that we have our own children, we understand that immense desire to protect our kids, no matter what age they are. So that must have been so incredibly difficult for your parents to try to protect you from shield you in some way from the horror that you were living. And it's just amazing that she was able to do that so well.
As difficult as it was for us as children, Can you imagine as a mother? I didn't know anything else. It just got progressively worse. This started when I was already 3, 4 years old in Germany, but it got progressively worse. But my mother, for parents to have to be everything taken from them, all material things, and have to go out and be sent into the not knowing, the unknowing situations. And for adults, and my father was, it was beyond difficult for him. He was stripped of all of his dignity. All his business was gone. He had no way of providing for his family, no way, on the contrary, nothing that he could do against what was done to his family. And it was for adults and for parents beyond difficult, for sure. But my mother had tremendous inner strength and fortitude, enormous. What she went through and still came out with such positive thinking and positive inner strength is remarkable. And sort of rubbed off on me. And we would allow ourselves to harp on the negativity that we were surrounded by. And there was always that hope. We never, ever gave up hope. Never. There were times we were despondent. We were always hungry. We were thirsty. We were in pain. There was no medication. But we had a feeling that things eventually would get better. Those who gave up hope had nothing to live for, and that was the end. Even if they weighed a few kilos more than we did. Eventually, though, we were liberated by the Russian army, and they took us to a nearby village in Germany, and the inhabitants of that village, it was a farm village, had left, and we took over their homes. Kitchens were stocked with ample food that was rich and good. Kelly, actually much too good for our star bodies. We could not tolerate that unfamiliar nourishment. And at that time, at the age of 10 and a half, I weighed 16 kilos, or as we here in America know, it's 35 pounds. What do you go by, kilos? Or go by
kilos in Australia.
Yeah.
Yes.
And my mother weighed a mere 35 kilos, about 70 pounds here in America. And so it's and that's where my father died, was in this farm village. Yeah. And that's how we eventually were able to transport it to wherever we wanted to go. So for my mother, it was tremendously difficult, but she picked up the pieces. She picked up the pieces and was able to make wonderful, very important decisions. And came to America, which first we had to learn Dutch because we were in Holland for 3 years. Then we came to America. We had to learn English. And my mother came to America at the age of 40, knew no English, learned to read, write, and speak a magnificent English. And there were two things that my mother demanded of my brother and me. I don't know if I mentioned that there was my father who died. My brother, who was 2 years old, was 2 years older than I am. My mother and I were the ones who were able to reach America. And the two things that my mother demanded of my brother and me when we came to America was, number one, learn English, learn it quickly, and work as hard as you can at work and at school in order to succeed. I was 13 when I came to America, knew no English, and I was placed in the 4th grade with 9-year-olds because of my lack of knowing the language. And my brother and I worked after school to help our mom pay bills. We worked very hard at that, and I worked very hard in school I went to summer school, took extra courses, and I was able to graduate at the age of 18, along with my other peers at that age, and I ranked 8th in a class for 267 students. So it worked, yeah, with determination, with faith, and with hope, you can overcome just about anything and everything. But that determination and perseverance is of utmost importance for all of us to hang on to, no matter how difficult life gets. Yeah.
I think, you know, what I've read about your mother, and I know how much you loved her and how much you respected and adored her, but she led by example, didn't she? With that strength and courage that she had, she, I guess, showed you how to live your life, and it just must have been incredibly difficult for her to get to arrive. Yeah. Marion, do you speak 6 or 7 different languages?
No, only about 3 or so. And ik spreek een klein beetje Hollands. I speak a little bit of Dutch. Dutch was the only language I spoke when I came to America. I didn't know anything else. German, we were not speaking, certainly no way. So we came to America from Holland. So Dutch is what I spoke. But no one here speaks Dutch. So I was so determined to learn English. So Dutch was left on the side, and eventually I forgot. I can understand it some, I can speak it. Ik spreek het een klein beetje. I speak it a little bit. And Anime de Beret Ivrit Ketzat, I speak a little bit of Hebrew. And ich spreche ein sehr gutes Deutsch. I speak an excellent German. Somehow that's my mother's tongue, and that stayed with me, even though I never attended a German school, never went to school in German. Somehow, and I do speak some English, so yeah. But,
well, you speak English very well.
It's all right. It's okay, yeah. But I like to think that my story conveys a message of perseverance, determination, faith, and above all, hope. I would like to think that, yes.
I think for me, the 2 things that I get out of learning from what happened in Germany and across the world at that time is that not to allow this to ever happen again from the experience of what we've learned through what happened to all of you. But also the thing that strikes me the most is what the human spirit and body can actually endure. And it's beyond my comprehension what you went through and the feelings that you had. And I try sometimes to put myself in that position to see it through your eyes, just, but it's, I think they're the 2 most important things to take from that terrible time in our history, to not ever allow this to happen again, and to remember the strength and courage that we actually really do have, and that we can endure far more than we think we can.
Exactly. So often when I speak to the students, I say, I'm so thirsty. I'm dying from thirst. I'm starving. You don't starve so fast. You don't die of thirst so fast. And I tell them to please don't ever waste food. There's so many little lessons to learn. Don't waste food. Next, take as much on your plate as you can eat. Eat some of it, and don't dare discard the rest. Take as much as you can eat. You can always have more. And if there's leftover, put it in the refrigerator, put it in the freezer. You can eat it next time. And the next time you want to throw out bread, remember the story you've heard. Don't waste. there, there's so many lessons to be learned, and that's just one of them. And above all, of course, be kind and good and respectful towards one another. And that must begin at home, around the kitchen table, the dining room table, wherever we gather as a family. And it's of utmost importance to remember to be kind and respectful and tolerant towards one another. Had there been respect and tolerance towards one another some 70, 80 years ago, you, Kelly, and I would not be speaking about that dark period of our history. 9/11, September 11, 2001 would not have occurred. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, North Korea, all these countries that are in such turmoil would be peaceful countries for its people. Be kind and good and respectful and compassionate and tolerant towards one another. That is definitely the basis for peace. No doubt. And we have to begin with our children. It must begin at home. Yes.
Marion, you have been back to Germany. So what was it like for you the first time you went back?
Very, very first time we returned, I never wanted to return to Germany, but there was a group that returned and my brother prevailed upon me, go back. He had gone back before. So this was 1995. It was the 50th anniversary of our liberation. And Nathaniel, of course, was with me. Two of our children joined us. And we visited my father's grave. And the reason my father and about 60 others have a private resting place in that farm village where we were liberated was because they died after some of the chaos had subsided. Those who died early on were all buried in mass graves. We also went to Bergen-Belsen. And Bergen-Belsen, the concentration camp where we were, looked nothing the way I remembered it. It had been burned down under the direction of President Eisenhower, who was then the commander of the Allied forces. So today, the Bergen-Belsen looks like a park. Green grass, shrubs, trees, really not bad looking, except for the mounds everywhere. Mounds with flags that read, "Here lie 1,000. Here lie 2,500. These are the mass graves of our people. And then we returned to my former hometown of Hoya, near Hanover. And there we were greeted by public officials who apologized over and over again. And then there was a non-Jewish young couple by the name of Heike and Hans Huth. And they took us to the Jewish cemetery, which was in terrible disarray. It had not been cared for since 1938. And they took us to our family plot, and there, among the toppled over stones, was a brand new shiny granite footstone with the inscription: Zur Erinnerung an die zerstörte Grabstelle der Familie Blumenthal, Hoya 1894 bis 1938. I'll translate. In memory of the desecrated plot of the Blumenthal family, Hoya, 1894 to 1938, placed there by this non-Jewish young couple, unbeknownst to us, a most beautiful, generous, kind gesture. Never thought that I would refer to non-Jewish Germans in such glowing terms. And it's people like these that renew one's faith in humanity and that become wonderful, wonderful dear friends of ours. And then we returned several times, and whenever we returned, I speak in schools and universities and churches, and I do so in German. Very difficult for the young people to hear. After all, it happened in their country, by their grandparents and great-grandparents' generation. A huge, huge burden for these young people, unfortunately. And then we returned in 2010. We were back there about 6, 7, 8 times total. And in 2010, We returned because a brand new public high school in my former hometown was named in my honor. So now we have the Marion Blumenthal Oberschule in Hoya. It was a beautiful, beautiful celebration, and very courageous for this little town. Hoya was just a very small town, a few thousand people, and only about 10 or so Jewish families. But for this little town to redress what happened so many years ago in the midst was extremely courageous, for sure. And the night before the celebration of naming the school, we commemorated the Night of Broken Glass, where our synagogue once stood. You know about Kristallnacht, yes? The Night of Broken Glass. Yes. Nazis smashed the windows and the storefronts of Jewish-owned stores and Jewish establishments. And it was really, that was the beginning of the Holocaust, no doubt. Yeah, that was the beginning of the Holocaust. And so...
Well, I can't think of a better person for those children that attend your school to look up to, Marion, and what an honour that must be for you.
It's wonderful experiences having returned, for sure. And I do need to know that Germany is doing everything in its power to continually remind their people of what happened back then. There is murals in their parliament depicting the Night of Broken Glass. People who visit the parliament, and it's constantly visited, will always see that. And then they came up with something else. It is called ein Stolperstein, a stumbling block. You don't stumble over it. It is a metal plaque that is deeply embedded in the sidewalk in front of the home where the person once lived and never returned. And on that metal plaque is engraved his or her name, date of birth, where, when, and how he or she died. All that is on this metal plaque. And there are numerous plaques like this throughout Germany, throughout some European countries. I know in Holland they have them as well. So it has to be commended that they're doing much. And today's generation certainly is not at fault as to what happened back then. It's almost 70, 80 years ago, a long time. A long time. What I meant to show you is the very star that I was forced to wear. It says Jude, which in German means Jew. It was another way to denigrate us and to isolate us and to set us apart from the rest of society. And we just, again, we must do everything in our power to prevent such horror from ever happening again. Yeah. And that's,
Marion, your mother kept a lot of those.
Yeah. She kept the documents that are in the book. Without documentation, there would be no book. Nobody would just accept a story that I told without documentation. And she had such foresight. She was a brilliant, wise, beautiful lady, and never knew for sure whether we would survive. But she kept these items, and there are other items that I have here that she kept in a knapsack. That's all we had. Amazing, just amazing. I don't, and I never questioned her. This is what she had. And in retrospect, you know, Kelly, I wish I had asked her some other questions, and there's no one to answer my questions now. And as you know, life goes on, I realized that there's certain things I just took for granted, like we all do, and no one to ask.
Marion, your greatest revenge to the man with the moustache is the wonderful life that you have led and the happiness and beautiful message that you share with the world. And I would be remiss to not ask about Nathaniel because, gosh, you've been married for nearly 7 70 years.
68 years is past August. Nathaniel, come say hello.
Hi, Kelly. Whoops.
Hello, Nathaniel. It's so lovely to meet you.
Yeah, I mentioned before, none of this would have happened without him. I just don't do this computer. And I must say that he's a wonderful husband. He was a fabulous, fabulous son-in-law. Of course, he's a wonderful father, but he was a fabulous son-in-law to my mother. And just a wonderful, wonderful human being. He was an Air Force pilot and tremendously disciplined and conscientious. You'd have to be as a pilot. And so there's something else I wanted to say. I don't know. That's all right. But we have 3 children, and all 3 are happily married, and they've given us 9 beautiful grandchildren and 7 magnificent, beautiful great-grandchildren. So I always say, showing a picture of our family, I don't have one right here, it shows survival and continuity. So, yeah. So the man upstairs, even though I don't know where he was during that time, he must have been on vacation someplace, but I don't know. But faith I will always have, even though I question plenty question, tremendous tumultuous feelings within me. But faith I will always have. As I said, here I am, 3 children, 9 grandchildren, 7 great-grandchildren, from whom generations will be forthcoming. He made sure that enough of us survive so that we will always be here. I am proud of my faith, as I'm certain you all, the audience, your listening audience, viewing audience, are proud of their faith and of their heritage. But please, please, let us all remember to respect the right of others to their belief. Be kind and good and respectful towards one another. They'll get me to say this in different aspects. It is so important.
Mm-hmm. Marion, it's been such a pleasure. Now, you have a Facebook page called Perfect Pebbles. People can also find your website, which is For Perfect Pebbles. That's, yes. Now, I have had a little bit of trouble getting your book in Australia. Only I've been able to order it through Booktopia, so I'm going to put a link up on my website. It should actually be there already. So people can buy the book in Australia through the link, or you can go straight to Booktopia, that's fine. Thank you, Marion, for your courage in sharing your story, because I know it mustn't be easy to relive that terrible time of your life, but it's so important for people like you to do that, because that's the only way we will know and learn and, going forward into the future. As you said, this is the last time in our history where people will be able to hear firsthand from survivors of the Holocaust. So thank you, Marion. I'm so pleased you're here to speak with me.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having given me the opportunity to be with your listening audience, viewing audience as well, for sure.
Thanks so much for watching our video. I hope you enjoyed it, and please try to remember to just click on the subscribe button so we can keep you updated with everything that's happening. Thank you.